Welcome to this, the second of our startup fundraising series on non-dilutive federal awards and grants this evening. I'm Jonathan Turk, class of 1986, undergrad in economics. We're excited to have interest for today's event from across the country. Thank you for joining us. As a reflection of you, our audience, and scope of our membership base, our group is being renamed Stanford Angels and Entrepreneurs United. That's essentially, everything except for New York and California. For those new here, our group's mission is to enrich, educate, and connect the Stanford startup community across the country's innovation centers. Launching in the pandemic, we offer virtual programming for entrepreneurs and their supporters to lighten the tough journey. The format today will start with moderated questions submitted at registration. Next, we'll open up to live questions for our panelists. You can use the raise hand feature to ask a question yourself or type the question into the Q&A box. We'll conclude with announcements. Note, today's event is for educational purposes only and should not be construed as investment advice nor endorsement. The session is recorded. Now, I'll hand it over to Sheila and the panelists.
Thanks very much, Jonathan. I'm Sheila Pruva, MSCS from Stanford and a co-president of this group. We are delighted to welcome you and our three remarkable entrepreneurs as panelists this evening. Aurélie Boimel is co-founder and CEO of Blue Sphinx, an ERP technology solution for small to medium businesses. The company is supported by the National Science Foundation. An expert in business data insights and AI, she previously founded information technology consultancy Big Experts. She started her career at the Boston Consulting Group, serving clients across the United States and Europe. She was also an officer in the French Air Force. She earned a BA in economics, a BS and MS in cognitive science from Stanford University. Delighted to have you here, Aurélie.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Sheila, and for having me here tonight. I'm very happy to be here, and I will do my very best to share what information I have with you and the audience. Thank you.
Thanks. Jason Rathje is the co-founder and managing partner of AF Ventures, the commercial investment arm of the Department of the Air Force. AF Ventures implements novel capital initiatives for dual-use technology ventures in the U.S. Air and Space Forces. AF Ventures accelerates product market fit between companies who are passionate about national security and Air and Space Force members. Jason earned a PhD in Stanford's Management Science and Engineering Department, specializing in the intersection of entrepreneurship, innovation, and national security. Welcome, Jason.
Thanks for having me, and I'm excited to talk to you all today about AF Ventures and AFWorks and working with the department.
Rick Zelenka is an intellectual property attorney, business executive, engineer, and founder of Drone Traffic, which was awarded NASA funding as the Waze for drone traffic. His company develops a patented airborne drone monitoring, reporting, and avoidance system for manned aviation pilots. Rick also heads Critical Path IP law. He was an executive at Boeing, Northrop Grumman, and NASA. Rick has deep experience with SBIR grants from his time at NASA. He earned his JD from University of Denver, MS in mechanical engineering from Berkeley, and BS in astro-engineering from Urbana-Champaign. Rick enjoys flying and is an FAA licensed private pilot. Welcome, Rick.
Thanks very much. I'm really grateful to have the invitation from you and my colleague, Greg Mayer, who go back all the way back to the Chicago days. I also appreciate you guys allowing me to speak and overcome any inhibitions you might have about having a Berkeley grad attend your forum. Thought I would just take that elephant or bear right out of the room. Okay.
Great, let's get started. So Aurélie, could you help set the stage? What is non-dilutive versus dilutive funding?
Yes. So before I answer the question, I do want to caveat first that everything I'll be saying tonight comes from the perspective of having received an SBIR from the National Science Foundation. It is my first SBIR award, so I cannot speak for other agencies, and I know that my other panelists will be able to address that. So please keep that in mind for the things that I say. So the first thing is that SBIR and STTR awards are what we call, non-dilutive funding. What it means concretely is that you receive investment from the agency and they do not take equity from your company. So this is really in contrast to other investors or VC firms or PE firms, who actually take a stake in your company. So the thing is that, so as long as you don't have to repay the money either, as long as you respect the rules, right? The money does come with rules. So when you submit your application, you're going to submit a budget, and then you do actually have, to stick to your budget. And if you want to make changes, you'll have to ask for approval. But fundamentally, what you have to keep in mind is that, the NSF SBIR award is a contract that you're given to perform work. You receive the bulk of the money up front. You have to perform the work that you proposed, and you have to produce a final report. And then the last, in the NSF case, the last 25,000 are dispersed after you give your final report. So in some sense, it's very interesting because you do receive, funding, and the phase one, that's $250,000 more or less. You don't have to pay it back, but you are taking taxpayers' money, and you are going to be audited in the future, and you are actually given this money to perform work. So it's more like a contract in that respect.
Okay, great. So that actually brings us to what is the difference between awards and grants or contracts in government speak, if you will? Jason or Rick, would you like to take that?
I think I could take that one. So the SBIR program is a great example of this. The SBIR program on the NSF side is actually a grant. They've received the money up front to perform the work. The funding, when you get it from the DoD, is a contract. What is the difference for that? A contract is even a more strict version of what was just discussed. So it's for us at AF Ventures, for example, we use Air Force SBIR funding to do a lot of our work. Our phase ones are $50,000, so they're about a fifth of the total amount that the NSF gives out. And there's a strategy to that that we try to fund a lot of phase one contracts because our objective is not just to do the basic science that might be performed by the NSF, but for the Air Force, we cater to a large market. Right? Our market is the Department of the Air Force. So we are a very small investment fund in a very large market that is the Department of Defense, is the Department of the Air Force. So billions and billions of dollars in annual procurement of products and services that are intended to be derived from the R&D funds that we invest through contracts. But that's why we have contracts, because you're building a technology that is going to be hopefully bought by the department later on. So that's the big difference between the two. Grants are a little bit more free form. They're more generally situated for more basic scientific research. Contracts are generally for later stage stuff. So in the R&D category, which is where all this money comes from, early stage funding and later stage funding separated in the colors of money. That's what we call it in the Department of the Air Force. And so for later stage funding, that's the kind of funding we have access to. And that's why we have contractual documents. They're far more structured in terms of exactly what you need to provide and when. But I will say across the board, it doesn't matter if you have a grant or a contract, you're signing up to do work for the department or for any department, right? Whether it's the Department of, let's say you're doing work with the NIH or the Department of Energy or the Department of Defense, you're signing up to do work for the federal government. And so that is the expectation, is that you perform that work over time. And generally speaking, the more money that you get to do R&D, the more structured the contract is, the more work you have to do, right? So as the funding goes, so does the structure and the reduction in kind of the freedom of movement and what you're working on.
So could you give us a bit of context around how much in funding is available to startups through various federal programs annually?
So just quickly on the SBIR program and the STTR program, it's about $3.5 billion annually. It's executed through 11 different federal agencies. So for example, the NSF has a program, the Department of the Air Force has a program. Both of our programs are very different. They're both based in the same kind of construct of SBIR, but the way that we structure a program just depends on what our mission is. You know, a National Science Foundation is to produce science, right? For the Department of Defense, it's to build technologies that the Department of Defense needs to buy. It's a very different construct, right? We cater to different mission needs. For the Air Force, there are multiple ways we can work with small businesses and startups. Our program at AF Ventures, the SBIR funding that we have access to, is really geared towards growth-focused companies. So companies who want to go from, you know, a 5-employee company to a 5,000 employee company. And to do that, we execute about $300 million or so annually through our fund. And so that's annual expenditures that all goes into R&D contracts. And it goes to kind of these different phases of the program, which I'm sure we'll get into later. I'll say that's not the only fund. That's R&D funding executed through the SBIR budget. That's one program in all of the federal government. Now it's really friendly to small businesses and startups because of the nature of the program. But there's many different ways you can source funds from the government, not just through the SBIR program. Last year alone, $60 billion in the Department of the Air Force went to small businesses. Again, for us in the Air Force, it's all about trying to get companies into products and sales with the department.
Now, two key programs that have already come up are the Small Business Innovation Research, which is the SBIR or SBIR, and then there's the Small Business Technology Transfer, which is the STTR. Now, why should startups consider these programs? What are monetary and non-monetary benefits?
Maybe I'll take that one. The reason to consider these grants, I guess it's a couple of reasons primarily that hit. One is you're going to get some credibility right away in saying that you've gotten money from Air Force, NASA, NSF, or people like that. The other thing is just bluntly that you're getting money to develop technology, science that otherwise you would have paid for yourself. So those are immediately two reasons that you should pursue these. There are downsides, though. Nothing is free. In this case, there is a lot of bureaucracy you have to deal with, and there's definitely ins and outs of applying for these grants or these research endeavors. So it is not something you want to take sort of for the faint-hearted. If you just sort of dive in and put a proposal in, if you're not very aware of the mechanics of the proposal and the process, you're going to be putting yourself behind the proverbial 8 ball, and frankly, you have a very low chance of winning. There are entities out there that guide people in the mechanics of putting together proposals, that guide people, all for money, of course, guide people in increasing their win percentage. In my particular case with my little company, Drone Traffic, even though I came from 10 years of working for NASA and had worked at a large company that was pursuing and small companies pursuing small grants and contracts from NASA in particular. So I had a level of savviness, I would say, or understanding of how to do these things. When my company was founded 3 years ago, I ended up going to a larger company that I knew from my NASA days to be the front organization and do the lion's share of the work. And I was a sub and contractor to them. There were several reasons for that, but the biggest reason was they do this all the time and they've been doing it for years. And so the whole dance of figuring out how to do the mechanics of applying for these grants was done. And I didn't have to worry about it. I could only focus on what am I trying to do for my company and what can I advance in a partnership with this company from my friends that I knew from years ago. So that's why you should do it, and a little bit of cautionary tale.
Great. So what expenses for commercialization are allowed? Market research, business development, what's the distinction?
Maybe I'll take that and then I'll drop the mic for a bit. But this actually came up quite recently with a client of mine putting on my law firm hat. It's going to vary. The top answer is it's going to vary by the agency on what they will provide. So I'll let the others weigh in on military and NSF. But in the NASA world, they do allow some portion. And I'm looking down at my notes. It's fairly new. Something called technical and business assistance. There's always got to be an acronym, so it's TABA. But this TABA money goes toward commercialization activities, market research, business activities. And then to answer your question very deliberately, for a phase 1 small business innovative research grant from NASA, so we're all the way down NASA small business innovative research grant phase 1, it's $6,500. And the reason that I know about this is because a client of mine, a current law firm client, said, hey, we're applying for a small business innovative research grant. You're already doing our patents and other IP. If we get this $6,500, are you okay to be doing our patents using that government money? And of course I said, sure, no problem. But so that is that slice. I was told that in a phase 2 for NASA, it's $50,000. So of course you'd want to spend 49,000 of that 50K on intellectual property protection. That's my attempt at a joke. Mm-hmm. There's other things you can do with it, but you can use that money for commercialization and marketing activities. Being the government, there's certainly going to be categories of what that means. I don't know enough about it to tell you it's this and it's not that, but that's how it works, again, in the soda straw of NASA.
Okay, great. So give us an idea, what type of company would qualify for SBIR or STTR? Uber, Tesla, SpaceX, Apple, Orly?
Yeah, so I think at least for NSF, I think you have to be a small company, but to be clear, the bar is like less than 500 employees. So that's actually quite a wide range. The other thing is that you need to be majority owned, which means more than 50% owned by US citizens or US permanent residents. And you cannot be majority owned by a VC or a PE firm. Now, I think for NSF, the key to understand is that your proposal, if you want to apply for an SBIR, must really entail some deep technological or scientific innovation. That's the key component. It's called NSF for a reason. It's about advancing science for the benefit of society. So if we were to talk about, the names that you mentioned, if they were smaller or when they were smaller, Tesla, could qualify, in theory, because, they're developing new technologies for electric cars, right? Similarly for something like SpaceX, right? On the other hand, if you think, of a company like Uber, though very innovative in other respects, from a technological standpoint, the Uber app is not deep technological innovation. And therefore, in the context of NSF, that would be less of the profile that you're looking for. So I would say, therefore, that from the NSF standpoint, when you want to apply, you want to make sure that you have, on your company, a balance between that technical expertise. That's really a requirement. Someone who has actually done research in the specific field in which you will be developing your technological or scientific innovation. And at the same time, also have, someone, or people on your team who have some business experience who can help, to develop the commercialization plan.
Jason or Rick, do you have anything to add there?
I might add a couple things. So one, talked about NSF. Qualcomm won a SBIR grant from NSF in the 1980s, basically right after the program was started. So big companies came through the SBIR program and talked about it. There's tons of other government programs though out there not relating to the SBIR program. So Tesla, when they IPO'd, got a $465 million loan from the Department of Energy. Apple got a loan from the Small Business Administration. So, I would say we've been kind of collectively talking, because our collective worlds are really around technology development in the R&D category, or more in the basic science category of work. But as a company, as a small business, there are a ton of federal programs that are available to you as you think about your growth plan, as you think about your product roadmap, as you think about your future revenue strategies. And so some of the people on the call today may be a 2-employee company, you may be a Series C company. And so as you think about this, I know we're kind of focused on the angel category, but really it's always good to know what is out there within the government space, so you kind of continue to pursue these things. The other thing I may mention is if you're interested in a program, you really got to know what that program does. So the NSF has this program called the Phase 2B program. It's this really cool program that we at Aft Ventures copied almost lock, stock, and barrel, because I love it. It's a way that we actually do matched investment later on, because at Aft Ventures and in the Air Force, we don't pay for commercialization. We don't do TABA, right? The reason why is because we want you to work with our market. Commercialization for us means transition to DoD procurement. So we are the market. We cater to the market of the Department of Defense. So that's why when you're talking about commercialization in our context, you're really working with the Air Force. Now it's good and bad, some could say, in different categories, because we want you to still to think about growth, think about commercialization and marketing outside of the department. So we do matched funding contracts all of the time with the private investment community. We've done 160 other transactions. Throw another buzzword at you. An other transaction, that's not a formal contract, that's not a grant. Some are kind of in between, to do work with a company where we actually matched and syndicate with private investors. So yes, as a company, you lose some equity because you're working with a venture capitalist, but you don't lose as much, because the part of that risk comes to us doing the non-dilutive co-investment. You could still grow and strategize and commercialize. We are just paying for the technological development, but you can work with multiple funding partners through the process. And again, that came from the NSF, who's been doing that through their Phase 2B program for quite some time. So every program is different. Highly recommend looking at that. We talked about the other, go back a couple steps, but we talked about third parties you could work with, for example. They're out there. What we try to do at Aft Ventures is we try to reduce barriers to entry significantly to make it really easy for you to work with us. So for example, we just closed our latest round of proposals as of yesterday. 25 slides was your entire Phase 1 proposal. Didn't need an NSF, full on technical volume. All we needed was a 25 slide deck. Why? Because our Phase 1s, we're paying for feasibility analysis. We want to demonstrate the feasibility of your idea in the Department of the Air Force. So it's very different. We're not paying for basic science, because that's not our mission in the Department of the Air Force. We also hold weekly Ask Me Anything sessions. So if you're a company and you're interested in working with us, you can come online and talk to one of our government folks directly. And I know that I've been working with the DOE, who's thinking about adopting some of these things as well. So the SBIR programs are trying to really reduce those barriers to entry, so you're not kind of forced to go these other routes, although they're certainly out there. And there's a market for them because they're good at what they do. But what we try to do is we try to make sure, hey, there's opportunity space here, and we want you to come work with us. So we're really trying hard within the Air Force to reduce those barriers to entry as a great starting point to working with the DoD.
Let's review eligibility now. Jason, as you mentioned, there are 11 agencies in the SBIR program, 5 of which are also in the STTR program. First, how should a startup navigate through these different agencies? Which agency covers which industry?
So I think just from the, just start here. I think from what I understand, NSF has probably one of the broadest scope, because, it is science in general. And within the NSF, SBIR, STTR, you have several tracks. So because my company is doing software, we are in the IT track, but there's also robotics, there's biotechs, there's medical, there's also, material sciences. So the SBIR awards are also being allocated through the different fields. The thing is also to keep in mind is that you can also apply to different agencies. I think that's something that you have to strategize a little bit. I have certainly seen among my peers, people who now have an SBIR from NSF, but also had one from NIH that got one from DoD. The thing to keep in mind if you are trying to do these concurrent awards is that you cannot be billing 2 agencies for the same work. So that's the thing. This is where also people sometimes really make very serious mistakes. So you can be applying as a company because you have several innovations to different agencies, but you have to keep really close tabs about what work you're doing for which agency.
Rick, do you have anything to add there?
Well, I think it's as best as you can go to forums that each of these agencies typically do have, whether it's online or, in the before time, you could actually go to forums and go to meetings and hear about things. NASA in particular, out in my neck of the woods out here before COVID, was doing annual meetings where they would bring together not just NASA people, but also related agencies like the Air Force in aerospace, and talk about their small business programs. The SBA in general in different jurisdictions will have forums where you can hear about broadly what each of the agencies are doing. I didn't know those numbers, Sheila. You talked about 15, I think you said, or 11?
11.
11, I'm sorry. So that way you can get a high level understanding of how these programs work. It was news to me that the phase 1 with the Air Force is at 50K. I did not know that it was that, nor did I know about this business of just presenting a slide deck. Again, my experiences with NASA, and it's definitely there's definitely some barriers to entry. NASA wants to help people, definitely. I have enough NASA blood in me still to say that. They want to encourage people to come in, but at the end of the day, there's definitely procedural barriers to entry to come in. So I would say get the overview high level of where you might want to go. And then the next level below that, as best you can, just chat with those people and find out what are they really emphasizing for their SBIR or STTR programs? What technologies do they really want to have? Many of the programs within the SBIR, the emphasis areas stay the same each year, but maybe 10 or 20% of them change each year. So if you can get a heads up on, hey, we're looking at these things, these technologies versus others, that gives you a lead up. The other thing I would suggest is you're also going to understand sort of where they're heading. Different agencies will change with the times. We now have a new administration. NASA is going to have new leadership. They're going to be emphasizing different things with the new administration, as I would imagine other agencies will as well. Broadly speaking, you might see changes from near-term activities versus longer-term activities and different areas of research. So as best you can understand that by attending these forums and reading about where they're headed, it's going to be in your best interest.
And if I can just add one thing to this, because this is a lot of great pointers. The list of companies that have received an SBIR, STTR is actually public. So you can look online. There's Google for SBIR. In any agency, actually, it's one website that lists all of the companies that have received an SBIR. And what's also good, actually, the abstract is provided as well. So this gives you also a bit of the sense, like the companies that got the award from the different agencies, what for did it get it for? But what is it that they're working on? So that's another resource to try to be able to assess, where you could fit yourself best.
I'll add to that. So SBIR.gov is a fantastic website. In the Air Force, we want to work with you, period, whatever you're doing. I would say that the one big change that we made, and I agree with Rick, new administration, new change in DoD leadership, who knows what's going to come down the pike. But the one change we did make last administration to the program, and one that was really focused on scaling ideas that are coming from the non-defense sector. And then the open topic, that's what we're focusing on. We're focusing on our category is dual use technologies. That's what we fund. So it could be a satellite, right? That could be a new battery. That could be something in, we had many kind of COVID-19 related products come through this last round. We were in a special topic for innovations around healthcare last round. We use it all in the Department of Defense. You could think of every base we have in the Air Force as its own individual city. We have our own fire department, our own hospital, our own police force. So all innovations are at play for us. What we really care about is what is the market willing to bear. When I say the market, I mean, what is the Department of the Air Force's market willing to bear? What do we want to buy? That's going to be setting the signal for us. And so we do $50,000 phase ones because the intent is through that feasibility analysis that we all pay for. It's all the same thing across all these programs, the same general concept for this phase one. It's always a kind of a report or a publication or two that may come out of that, is to get to a prototype stage. And that's where the real work is being done. That's where the phase two comes in. And that's where in the Air Force, we're actually connecting you with a customer who's going to be working with you to buy a product and service that can be developed from the R&D that we in AppVentures invest in your prototype development process. So we have a really broad open topic. We run the open topic for the Department of the Air Force for that reason, because it is so important for mission agencies where we're buying products and services. So like the Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, to really be broad brushstrokes with the types of technologies we're interested in, because they have many different types of mission applications.
Okay. At what stage should a company apply for an SBIR? Pre-revenue or post-revenue?
It's going to depend here too. These are all fantastic questions. I'm interested to see what the other panelists say, kind of where they're at in their companies. We've had angel backed companies come through. We've had Series G companies come through. Companies have to be under 500 employees, 51% owned in the U.S. Those are basically the only two requirements. Why do we have that in the Air Force? It's probably different for some of the other agencies or services. It's because the phase ones allow companies to go to a phase 3 contract later on. It is a very great vehicle for scalable federal sales. And I can't stress that enough. You can, it doesn't matter if Rick's company wins a phase 1 from NASA. They can use that. If the Air Force goes, hey, we're really interested in that, we want to start buying or investing in R&D contracts with Rick's company, or start buying technologies after they're done their phase 2 for our mission systems. Rick can actually use that phase 3 concept to go directly sole source contract with the Department of the Air Force. They don't have to compete. They don't have to go through another BAA. It's an incredible authority that I think is just incredibly underutilized in the federal space. And that's why so many different types of companies, pre-revenue, post-revenue, apply to the SBIR program. I will say the one big difference for us between a SBIR and STTR is, generally speaking, STTR companies are focused on technology transfer from research institutions, from Stanford, let's say, and they're generally pre-revenue. That's kind of what I've seen working with those companies, because they're really focused on that tech transfer piece of the puzzle. SBIR companies can be kind of all over the spectrum.
Yeah, so from the NSF perspective, I think it's both. What I've seen among my peers, there are companies that are pre-revenue. I would actually say that, from what I've seen, a majority, at least probably more than 50% of those at NSF are like this, and some of them are also post-revenue. In our own case, we had one pilot client, but we still had to work a lot more on developing our technology. So the thing to keep in mind also is that I think as Jason has mentioned, some companies have already gotten some funding. Some companies actually have not gotten funding at all when they apply for the SBIR, and that is the seed funding that they're going to use afterwards to open more funding doors. And at NSF, phase 1, that's $250,000, which is still meaningful when you start out. And then the phase 2, which you can apply within a year or less, is actually up to $1 million at this point. So this is also a program that's geared towards companies that are in the early stage, have to develop their prototype. This is what the phase 1 in Spirit is for you to develop your prototype, to demonstrate that there is a potential, there is a market demand for what you're trying to bring to the market. And then, if you make a compelling case, then you can get, further things like the phase 2 or the phase 2B, the revenue matching program. So NSF also has in mind, if you're already very well funded and they're not making a difference to you as a company, they're also not, I think that makes it also less likely for them. I think they also are quite intent in making sure that the money that they give out makes a meaningful impact to the companies that they give it to. But that said, I've seen companies, who are actually, have already, done some sales in the tune of like $500,000, who still get the SBIR award. So that's the thing to keep in mind. I would say if you decide to apply for an SBIR phase 1, and especially with NSF, I would say that, as Rick has mentioned before, it is quite an involved process. In our case, we had to go through all the bureaucracy ourselves. You need to familiarize yourself with the different systems through which you will have to upload the different forms and get the different numbers. But more importantly, I think you need to apply when, especially if you're early, when you have a compelling proposal, right? Not just that you have an idea about an innovation, but that you have also done some thinking about, what is the actual product, what's the product market fit? Who is the customer that I'm going to serve, that I'm aiming to serve, right? Because that's at NSF, that's something that they really emphasize, is the product market fit. And that's also one part of the proposal is also reference letters. And those are taken very seriously from what I understand. So you will have those reference letters. They could be technical letters. If you're on the technical side, someone who has actually knows the work you've done before. In our case, it was a professor at MIT who had worked with my co-founder, who said, look, the new technology they're developing, actually, that's legit. It can also be, a letter from a customer that you had or a prospective customer. All of this you're bringing a case to say, I believe that there is potential. I want to develop the prototype, and there is a market waiting for it. So I would say, I think, as I was really emphasized again, what Rick said before, one should not take, the application process of an SBIR lightly. The more data you have, the better story you can put forth in your proposal, the more the chances that you will actually get the funding. And I mean, in our particular case, for me and my co-founder, there were 2 of us. It took us 2 full months to really put the application together. And that's actually considered fast in the NSF world.
Great. Aurélie, thanks for highlighting just how highly competitive federal funding is. What else do reviewers look for in applications? Rick, Jason, could you comment on your perspectives from NASA and the Department of Defense?
Sure. I would say, first off, at kind of a threshold level, it's going to be, does this match up with what they're asking you to do? And it sort of sounds obvious, but there's going to be a description of what the area is that they're wanting proposals to be submitted in. And I can't tell you when I was reviewing proposals, you would get something that says, this sounds really cool, but it really isn't a fit for what we've asked you to present to us. Might be a fit in another category, but they didn't submit it in that category. They sort of think, well, I don't know what they're thinking, but a possibility is, if this is so cool, it won't really matter that it's not really all that great of a match. I'm not saying it has to be a 10 to 10 fits, but it's got to be a pretty good match, or you're not going to get anywhere with it. So, you got to come in, knowing that. The other thing is, where is it truly innovative and technical, which is what Aurélie was mentioned. You got to have something that does have credibility. Yes, these reference letters in the world of NASA matter. This is where you can get in a Tesla to say they're way too big to be bidding on it, but they could be a sub. Imagine that, to your little company saying, I'm doing work for you, or I endorse what they're doing. So that gives some credibility, up front when somebody's looking at it. So you want to make sure you answer the mail, as it were, in terms of what they're asking for. And then you want to make sure that, yes, you have something technically compelling. Another point that's related here is that when you're first considering, do I want to go after one of these proposals? Because yes, there is a bit of pain to it, and there's a delay in it. Is that really your best value play with who you've got working with your money and your people and your distractions? You've got to ask. It's the same kind of advice I give people when they come to me and they say, I want to get a patent. And I ask them, well, why do you want to get a patent? And I talk about their technology. Most of the time it makes sense that they want to pursue a patent, but sometimes they might be doing something that's really rapid, like the next Pokemon Go, and it's all software. And I tell them, I'd love to write you a patent, but it really doesn't make a lot of sense. for going after these government funds, if you are doing something that's really rapid software, as an example, the next Pokemon Go, really doesn't make any sense to be going after, you know, some government money because the cycle is so quick. So you sort of want to have a reality check before you even go in and throw yourself into this world.
I would just echo the letters of support is what we call them. They are really impactful. I think that the comment about you know, a sub, or for, you know, from our instances, a defense contractor. I mean, the fact that they're really interested in the technology from an integrator perspective, understanding how kind of the department works is always a good sign. But what I really do want to mention is look at the solicitation language. For us, you know, we have in the Department of Defense, we have a common website. So like it was discussed, you got to know kind of what buttons to push and where to get your DUNS number and your SAM number and your cage codes and all those other fun things that we require for the government. But then know your solicitation. So a solicitation is the document from which we advertise the competition that is the proposal that you are going to propose against, right? It's our request for proposals from industry, from companies to propose to work with us in the federal government through this structured process. And in that document, we lay out very clearly what we are evaluating against. For us at AF Ventures, we will evaluate against 3 primary criteria: the technical merit of the idea that you're proposing, its commercial potential, so the potential to scale commercially, and its potential to meet a defense need. So what, you know, what all of those things, what are those things? It says it in the solicitation language. I can't stress that enough. When we see proposals come in, they're great ideas, they just don't hit the mark. It's because they're not reading that document. We provide, a lot of agencies provide templates, they provide documents that people can utilize, that organizations and companies can utilize to actually write the proposals. For some reason, sometimes companies just don't want to use those templates. They want to do what they have. And that's never a good idea, because our evaluators are kind of really focused on specific things. And we absolutely say this in the solicitation language. You have to clearly articulate what you're proposing. I will say sometimes, especially people who are really technology focused, to miss the boat, and they over focus on one criteria and they don't address other things. So we really are asking you to propose against what's in the solicitation language, and that's what we evaluate against. So those are some of the critical things as you're kind of actually getting ready to write the proposal and send it in. What is the federal agency asking for? Make sure you're proposing something against what that agency is asking for.
Now, which third-party tools or services help inform about federal funding opportunities, and which ones can also help in preparation to meet these requirements, often which are in the lengthy solicitations you just talked about?
So I will comment first and say we don't endorse any third-party application. It's really for not that you know, we're going to not accept proposals if you use a third party, right? But we don't endorse any third parties. We try really hard at AF Ventures and AFWorks, as do other agencies, to provide resources to entrepreneurs so they don't have to use third parties, that they hopefully can just use the resources that we provide free of charge as the government to startups and small businesses to apply to these programs.
I think if I share I think in my own experience, I think we actually didn't ask for third-party help. You know, we read the solicitation very carefully, and maybe it is worth emphasizing the point that both Rick and Jason have said. Those are very detailed documents. It seems very tedious if you've never done this before, but the instructions are there. So in the NSF application, it's about 15 pages. It tells you what are the different sections that should be there, what questions you need to answer in each section. And earlier, there was a question around, you know, what expenses are allowed in the budget. It also explains in detail, you know, what is allowed as direct costs, as indirect cost, and all that jazz. So it is a tedious exercise, but the information is there if you actually go through it. I think in terms of preparation, for those in the audience who have some academic background and are interested in this, I would like to mention the I-Corps program. which I think that NSF is running. That stands for Innovation Core. Maybe some other agencies are doing it too. This program is a 6 weeks program that you can apply traditionally if you are a researcher in an academic setting and you're thinking about commercializing your technology. This is a sort of boot camp where you learn a lot of the basics about business, first and foremost about customer discovery. So in the case of DoD, your customer is the Air Force, and you need to learn to get to know better what they want. But if you're other fields, you actually have to do a lot of market research. You need to structure also your thinking. What is going to be your value proposition to match your customer needs? What is going to be your revenue model, your cost models, potential partners? What are going to be your channels that you're going to be using to get your product out there? So this is also for those who have more of a technical background and not so much of a business background. It's a great program that you can apply to, and I think they give you funding, from 20,000 or 50,000, something like that. Depends on. I think it changes a little bit, to help you travel. To give a lot of it is just travel funds, so you can go and meet potential customers to do customer discovery. So that program I-Core is what people go through sometimes as a preparation before they submit an application to SBIR. So in our case, actually, we're not affiliated with an university, so we didn't go through I-Core, but actually, as an SBIR award company, they gave us the option to do the I-Core program. So I'm actually going through this program right now, even already after the SBIR, and it is very helpful. So also, I think to the point I was raised earlier about what are the non-monetary benefits that you get beyond the money, there is also programs like this for which they give you extra money in to participate, and you have access to great mentors and former entrepreneurs that help you build your case really to get more funding afterwards.
Okay, great. So now we will open it up to live audience Q&A. If you'd like to ask a question of the panelists, please use the raise hand feature, or you're welcome to also type it in the chat if you're more comfortable with that. Sarah, would you like to ask a question now?
Yeah, I mean, this has been very interesting. I didn't appreciate how much the SBIR program varies across agencies. But the question I have is, for the various agencies with which you have experience, who all is reviewing the commercialization plan? And is it reviewed by the same panel that reviews your scientific plan? And first question is, do they all require commercialization plans? Yeah, no.
So no, they don't. Now, again, it depends on the agency. Some agencies that have specific topics around specific technology areas have teams, and those teams run the evaluations. For us in the Department of the Air Force, under the open topic, we've got a technical expertise spattered across the department, at every location where we do S&T work, which is pretty much everywhere in the United States. And we source from those technical experts to do the technical parts of the evaluations. Then we also have experts on the commercialization side. So we train folks through a number of opportunities to learn more about commercializing technologies via the Department of Defense, via the mechanisms by which we actually take those technologies and integrate them into mission systems that we are using. And so they are, generally speaking, different groups of expertise that's trained around the expertise under which they are evaluating. But I'll say, that's just us, and that's just us in one topic in a broader Air Force SBIR program, in a broader DoD SBIR program. That's, I can tell you, 180 degrees different from how the Department of Energy does it.
Yeah, and to weigh in as far as NASA goes, for phase one, the commercial potential is thinly, if at all, evaluated, to be blunt. It's going to be mostly about matching and technical expertise and what it is that are you answering the mail on the solicitation. So you want to get that first phase one, and then it's completely appropriate to be talking with your contracting officer, technical representative, or the principal investigator that's managing it for you as to, well, what happens in phase two as far as my commercialization? Because then it does weigh in terms of the NASA world is what they're doing. My experience is I'm not going to date myself, was quite a while ago, but in my days when I was at NASA, it was the same people would review the phase 2 as the phase 1, and they didn't have any commercial experience, to be blunt. They were researchers. And so things change. I don't know what they're doing now, to be honest, but it's totally legitimate to ask, who's reviewing this and how does that really go? That's a legitimate question. If they think it's an out of bounds question, they don't have to answer you. But while you're working that contract, you should just ask them.
John Sullivan, would you like to ask a question now?
No, thanks very much. No, I agree. Excellent panel, very informative. I have a short question for Jason, and then maybe a more detailed question for the rest of the panel. On AF Works and AF Ventures, you're assessing a market opportunity. Is it just for the Air Force, or you mentioned DoD, US Army, US Air Force? Like, do you also have some connections to the other branches of the Department of Defense?
So we with Air Force appropriated dollars, we focus on the Air Force, the Air and Space Force, because I don't know if everybody's familiar. We have a Space Force now in the U.S. So it's all under the Department of the Air Force. So I say department. I'm generally speaking about the Department of the Air Force. Although I will say we look at joint programs all the time. So we have a lot of efforts that are joint in nature. So we're working with the Army and the Navy or other federal agencies. I have a ton of programs that I've co-funded with Jen Gustetic, who just left the SBIR program manager lead out at NASA, where we've co-funded efforts. We've co-funded efforts with the Department of Energy or Department of Homeland Security, right? And I talk with Ben from the NSF constantly. So we do work together kind of across all of these government departments. But with our program, we are primarily focused as a kind of a minimum requirement for us on Air Force and Space Force needs.
That's great, thank you. And then the broader question is, can you have a virtual company apply for an SBIR where the PI / investigative team isn't full-time, but is doing it on the side or in their spare time, once they get the funds, assuming they have to meet the contractual requirements proposed in the grant / award, is that feasible?
Well, I can. Oh, go ahead, Orly.
No, I was going to say, I think from the NSF perspective, I understand this is possible. You do not have to be full-time as a PI. That said, if you do that, you have to be very careful about how many hours, and if you book salary for yourself, how many hours you're booking, for that SBIR award. And if you have receiving income, through your university or other grants, that you actually look about that carefully. But it's possible, and you can be completely virtual from what I see.
Yeah, so I have a tactical answer that's current, and then one that's older. That's more strategic. My tactical answer is on my SBIR with my little company, I'm a full-time patent attorney. And so I also needed to go to this company so that I could legitimately say, look, I'm the subject matter expertise. I'm going into a licensing agreement with this larger company to use my intellectual property, my patents to develop my concept. And so I was fractional on it in terms of like the number of hours, because that's legitimately what I was doing. And the principal investigator was full-time on this thing as part of this larger company there were only about 100 people at this company. My older story is when I was at NASA once, I got a proposal where everyone listed, well, I shouldn't be so glib. 2 of the people listed were literally CEOs at companies. And I knew the guys, and I knew there's no way these guys were going to be able to do this work at this level of effort. And so that was it for me. I didn't pursue it at all at that point. So it's got to sort of hang together legitimately. Obviously, there's a long line between fraud to the government and actually, what are you doing? But it's got to sort of pass the sniff test. And so I would be worried about something like that if it doesn't sort of pass the proverbial sniff test. But what is this guy doing?
Thanks.
Alex, do you have a question?
Yeah, I was going to say, well, how is intellectual property treated? There was a final report mentioned, particularly for NSF. Is that kept confidential? What kind of information does that final report include?
So for NSF, the final report, as well as your proposal, those are treated as confidential information, right? So all of these things are not being distributed. And actually, they ask you, when you write the proposal, to write the short abstract of the technical merit of the commercialization of the potential societal impact and commercialization plan in a way that can be made public. And I think on IP, I mean, the IP belongs to you, right? I mean, the work that you develop, actually is owned by your company, right? And actually, they do emphasize at NSF that you need to develop actually an IP strategy as you go out there and develop your technology and commercialize it. The NSF does want to know if you're filing patents related to the work that you perform under the SBIR. And so if you file a patent from the SBIR, technically the US government has march-in rights, which means that they can take your patent and license it to somebody else and compensate you for that. But to be clear, I think from what I understand, this has never happened at NSF. This is much more geared towards, a wartime emergency production situation. So I would say, if they're actually quite careful about IP. When you participate in seminars or boot camps, they say explicitly up front, don't put any confidential information in your slides. And I think they realize that, if they don't protect the IP, people are not going to be applying anymore.
Thank you so much.
I'm sure
So
Rick's got a lot of.
Yeah, I don't want to turn it into a treatise on that. And as in the spirit of Jonathan's disclaimer, I'm not giving legal advice here. I'm just giving some general thoughts here. All that Aurelie said is correct. That said, you have to go in there and there's something called data rights, which is a really bad phrase because it doesn't mean data like ones and zeros. It means generally intellectual property and other things. That's a whole subtopic of the law, and I don't deal with it. I actually hired a lawyer when I had my contract for my little side company to handle the data rights for me. I walked into that contract with an issued patent and have 2 more after it, and I still needed to protect what I had and disclose to NASA. This is what I'm walking in with. This data is mine, and you're not going to get it. I love you, NASA, but you're not going to get my patents. You're not going to get any rights to license it out. So I had to do a very specific carve out walking in because I didn't want to take their money and then be limited later on. And so it is something where what Aurelie said is proper, but you do want to go in there with eyes open and bring in somebody as appropriate that knows about government data rights, which is very much a specialized area of law that like I said, I don't do. I hire somebody else for it.
The only thing I'll add to that then is CBIR data rights. Again, terrible term. They're standard. They're standard in the program. So when it comes to the Department of Defense, this is something that comes up fairly often on multiple instances, right? Because our market, just like entrepreneurs and small businesses, don't want their IP adjudicated or utilized or kind of taken by the federal government. Although I've been in the federal government for years now, I've never seen that happen once in my entire career. The Department of Defense doesn't want to get vendor locked into a specific company, right? And we've seen this happen times and times again, right? So you talk about, hundreds of dollars for a wrench, right? That's generally speaking from a vendor lock-in scenario where we haven't paid for the data rights up front. All of that for us on the DoD side is really well taken care of into the CBIR program. It's extremely favorable to the small business, extremely favorable. So we can't even negotiate the data rights. They are standard. You own the IP as a small business for 20 years after you work on the Department of Defense's CBIR program, period. Right now, what does that mean? It means that we in the government have access to the IP. We know what you're doing. We have government purpose rights. The concept of march-in rights, I will tell you, if we're ever in a situation, this is my personal opinion, not an opinion of the federal government, my personal opinion, if we were in the situation we had march-in rights actually happen, is because there's a lot of bad stuff happening in the world and it really wouldn't matter, right? I think everything at that point would be on the table. So, and again, I've never seen that happen. I don't know of any instances that has ever happened, even in the wars that we've fought in the past. But as a new company coming in, absolutely highly recommend talking with somebody who knows a lot about this space and coming in with the eyes wide open. There's absolutely a mandatory obligation of the government that you can walk in and adjudicate with the government in advance for whatever contract you do, CBIR or otherwise, saying this is what I am walking in with, right? There's an IP list that goes onto the contract. It's one of our standard clauses that we put on government contracts and say, I have these specific patents. These are the IP. This is the IP that I am walking in with. You put that on that contractual document. And then once that contract is signed, this is official. This is the government saying, got it, you're right. We're not paying for those. We haven't paid for those. Those are yours. So we don't even have government purpose rights to those, which is as a category in and of itself within the data rights world. I did want to stress those SBIR data rights, they are standard for us. We don't negotiate them. We don't change their DoD statute, DoD policy on what we can and can't do with data rights in the SBIR program.
Okay, we have
Thank you so
another
much.
question from John Sullivan. John?
Sorry, I don't mean to dominate the question. This question is maybe an extra credit question. How, for those entrepreneurs on the panel, maybe what are the trade-offs on taking federal non-dilutive funds versus potential other sources of non-dilutive funds, such as philanthropic, foundation, social impact funds that you may or may not have explored as well? Are they faster, more money, less money, more strings, less strings? How did you trade off, potentially accessing those other types of funds if you have some experience in that?
So among the examples that you listed, I have little experience in, I think, social impact or looking at foundation. I think the trade-offs, in looking for funding, from the government fundamentally, a big plus is that it's non-diluted. So I think in my case, compared to other investors, people who would give money but take equity in exchange, especially at an early stage, it's a big advantage that you retain control of your company as a founder, as a co-founder. I think the trade-off, is really, there is a bureaucracy involved, and not just in the application process, but also, because you are going to be audited, you have to keep your books in a certain way. And, it starts very early on, right? And the more grants you get from the government, the more complex the grant accounting becomes. You can hire someone to do it for you. But I think that some of the trade-offs that we were really thinking about were more along these ways. But in our case, it was very important for us to retain control of our company and, still get a significant, amount of money as a seed fund. And we can deal with the intricacies, of the accounting.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for the questions. A final question for the panelists. What's your ask from the audience? Rick, would you like to start it off?
Wow, what is my ask from the audience? I guess as being negative on the government process. I believe in the process, and I've seen it from both sides of the street, as it were. I think it's a good thing for certain companies, depending on what the technology is, what they're doing, what their posture is, both legally and from a business perspective. So I would just stay upbeat and say these are good programs. They're definitely trying to be a part of an industrial policy for the USA, and I think they should absolutely be considered by the audience.
Jason?
Come check us out. Go to the AFWorks website, afworks.af.mil, check out AF Ventures, check out how to apply for the program. We'd love to see what you're working on and what you're interested in. And we've gotten a lot of new companies into the department through this process. I'll just say, appreciate everybody's time in taking the time to learn more about what the government is trying to do to support small businesses and entrepreneurs, to develop new technologies to strengthen the economy. Thanks again.
And Aurelie, what's your ask from the audience?
Well, I would say if you're interested in, and if you thinking, considering applying for an SBIR, do look at NSF. I mean, in our case, it has been a game changer. The NSF SBIR phase 1 is a game changer. I mean, not just about the money, but you get access to a network, you get access to all these programs that, that you're actually given funds to participate in. And I would say, especially in the case of NSF, it's a very broad range of topics that they cover and any sort of customer you can think about. So I would say, don't hesitate, and don't get bogged down just the bureaucracy. It's a lot of work, but if you're an entrepreneur, it's going to be a lot of work anyway. So you might as well, try it, if it's worth your time. And similarly, also thank you very much, for being here today. I hope it was helpful a little bit.
Well, thanks very much, Rick, Jason, Aurelie, and the audience for joining today's incredible discussion on non-dilutive federal funding. We hope to see you again soon, and I'll hand it over to Co-President Alex for upcoming announcements. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Sheila. That was a very insightful, incredibly informational discussion. Thank you so much to our panelists and to the audience for your participation. I'm Alex Montalbini, MS 2008. As Sheila said, co-president at Stanford Angels Entrepreneurs United.